what's going on, guys? It's me, Trading Man, and welcome back to Tree Placing Simulator 2015. We'll get to the tree placing soon enough, but we're working on dunes and this hillside, and we don't actually finish the whole thing. We get about 2/3 of it done, and I sort of give up to do more simple stuff. It's a little bit blasé today, which is why I might not sound the most enthusiastic, especially after the presentation I just came to, which was not the most fun thing. Came to? I just came to. I was passed out, and in my dream I was doing a presentation on civil engineering. Wait, no, that was a nightmare, and that was actually class. It wasn't really a nightmare. It just wasn't particularly enjoyable. There was a lot more waiting involved than I would have hoped for. It was an unusual setup. We went into a room with a bunch of other people who also had presentations and poster boards, and we all set up our poster boards, and they sent in a bunch of experts, and we had to talk to the experts as they came to our poster boards, and then they would grade us on how cool we were, and accurate and interesting and stuff like that. Except the only problem was there were 9 groups and 5 experts. So there was a lot of waiting for experts that went on. And I think it would have been a lot better done with more people. They didn't even necessarily have to be experts. They might have... One of the things... Actually, I just thought about it. Maybe I should propose this in some way, shape, or form. It probably would have been a better idea if we had a mix of people and you didn't know who were the experts. It would be like Secret Shopper, except with presentations. You'd pretty much give the same spiel to everybody, but you'd want to make it a good one just in case that person you were talking to was important in the field. Anyways, we do a lot of texturing this episode, but we do even more treeing. Everything that needs trees that doesn't have trees, where, trees are the next step, gets forwarded through that step. The only following step after that is details, and that involves grass and buildings and stuff like that, and the extra fiddly bit textures. Excuse me, Christ almighty, okay. This area is going to be home to a lot of different kinds of grass splines on these dunes / bluffs / hills. It's going to be a situation where right now it doesn't look like much. Well, it looks alright now, but it could definitely look better, and it's going to look better once we get the grass in. So we have this area here. I started to eventually figure out exactly what my color scheme was going to be, and I was still a little bit finicky on how the edges here were going. I wasn't sure whether to use the rock or whether to use the clay, but I eventually settled on a mix of both. The rock is definitely for the more prominent stuff, and the clay pretty much takes care of everything else. And it's really just to give some depth to the layers and give us some places where the grass won't be. Now, one of the things that you need to be careful of doing is creating monotony, and that has been done to death in a lot of these areas, in a lot of the areas between towns, especially where I don't have any interesting terrain going on. I try to include a feature in a certain area. For example, we were coming through the drumlins, although they didn't have any variation in terrain or ground cover, other than a handful of lakes, most of which we didn't see from the tracks anyways. There were the upcoming towards Providence, which is an area we haven't really looked at yet, but is available for the operating session in a couple of episodes, whenever that's going to be. I want to get the terraining done between here and Providence by then, so that we can run from Waterville to Providence, more than likely, and then run beyond. That's the pathway for logs there. But I'm not sure if we're gonna have all that done, because it's gonna be a piece of work. Though, if I can make a decent excuse as to why that area wouldn't be as crappy as this area, in terms of track work, that means I can make things a little bit easier for myself, break out the terrain tracks, which, despite the fact that they don't work very well in 12, are still a great time saver, and are often quite helpful. And make that whole construction... game locked up here. make that whole construction bit a little bit easier on myself, because we won't have to worry so much about the individual areas. But I might just break into it, probably from the top down, because that's what I know what I'm going to do. And just see how far we get before I kind of give up. Speaking of the top down, you'll see towards the end of the episode I start working from the top down on the Providence to Worcester line. And I start with just a big flat section, which I don't really do any terraining on. I just sort of drop trees onto it and go, okay, this is that. I didn't quite know what to do. There aren't any farms over here because the area is either not fertile enough or just isn't well set up. What am I trying to say? The area just is not privy to farming. I'm coming over here with a plateau tool trying to work out a little bit of the bumps here, although I'm not sure how I'm doing in terms of creation of gradient, which is something I don't want to be doing. I want to leave my gradients more or less as they are. And I come in here, and this is our big gray splotch, because we haven't done much here. Now this is where Tree Simulator begins. I'm going to have to make idle talk for the next 10 minutes while pretty much all I do is place trees. And in hindsight, I might have wanted to go with an even faster time scale for this. It was about an hour and a half of straight up tree placing among different sections of the route. However, it was something that needed to be done, and a lot of it needed to be done. And we got a very considerable amount of work on the trees done. And just like anything else, it's kind of cool to see in super speed. My computer did start to disagree with me towards the end of it there. You'll see when we get to that, although I don't think it shows up too much on the footage. It just wasn't, I had disappearing trees on me, I had areas that didn't want to get covered in trees, the game kind of saying, hold on a minute, very often, though that may not have been the game. I don't know, I wasn't hopping into Task Manager to see, I was just sort of chalking it up to TS12 being disagreeable. And that's, just kind of call it a day and pressed on and did my couple of hours and went to do other stuff. For example, War Thunder 1.70.1945, which was to commemorate the fact that it's been 70 years since the end of the war. Anyways, I think this area is just about done. Remember, the last thing we have to do to make this good is add the highlighting textures and then add the grass, which we haven't done outside of Waterville there. And we really aren't going to be doing it into Worcester. This is me bending track work around trees, because that's just the kind of thing we do here. However, it does occur to me... Okay, yeah, no, I fix it. I was gonna say, we totally ran off of the... What's it called? We totally ran off the ballast. Just by accident. And here I am spotting, gaps in the trees, areas where we could do with more, and just placing more. Because you really can't have too much maple, beech, and birch. Trying to keep the trees closed in around the track is important, because you're not running through a big open space, and the fact that the track is sort of weaving all over the place is a very good indicator of, how cheaply it was built. And it shouldn't be weaving just because of the terrain. It's the kind of thing where, sure, it's probably simplest to build in a straight line, but that may not be the thing you want to be doing. You may be running into trees that are particularly tough to chop down, so you just go around them. It's not that much of a big deal to curve a little bit and curve back and still stay on your basic vector. Again, these narrow gauge railways, the 2-foot gauge especially, the main narrow gauge, which is a little bit of which is really where I'm taking inspiration here, of course. They really, really weren't over-engineered. They weren't under-engineered. They got the job done, but they didn't do it in any sort of way that would make someone go, man, that was properly built right there. They'd sort of say, wow, that worked, I guess. if you look at these main 2-foot-high trestles, and the trestles that I've been using, they're the kind of thing where they don't have any lateral support. They're kind of liable to topple over if presented with a strong sideways load. But that kind of thing just generally wouldn't happen, so you didn't need to worry about it. And, again, these were built in days when you really wouldn't over-engineer stuff that much. When I compare these trestles, what I'm comparing them to is the out west trestles, where you'd see the grid formation of beams. And those are considerably stronger. They're probably about twice as costly in terms of actual materials. So it's, if you want to have your bridge building cost, this is when you go with the shoddy, only support in very specific directions sort of bridge, where you won't be facing anything really particularly troublesome, and your loads won't be heavy at all. You'll get some logs. That's about it. That's what the 2-footers were for. They were A, for transporting logs, and B, for connecting somewhere with nowhere. And the nowhere is exactly what we're building right now. We've got our hole in the drumlins, which is the other name for the town of Worcester. The hole in the drumlins. We've got Waterville, which is the town on the lake. And then we've got Blindside Bluff, which wasn't anything except for an interchange until the auto road came along. And at that point, people realized, hey, this place is accessible. We should build beach houses here. And then it sort of cycled back to, well, it's accessible, but there's also a train. Why don't we just take the train? And that's how Providence got an auto road. Because people started commuting there to get on the narrow gauge and run out here. There are only 2 services still standing on the narrow gauge at this point, and it's the Beech train, which is more or less seasonal. The winter does in fact hit, but there's still a little bit of incentive for people to go down there. It's a much higher incentive than it is in, say, New England, where you've got Slurpee waves and snow everywhere. You still have snow from time to time, but this summer definitely lasts a lot longer, and there are people who will stay there, and this is basically their only supply line. The auto road doesn't have that much traffic, especially in terms of goods trucks. Anyways, that's one of the services, and the other service is logs. Because coming out of Waterville, well, there are the docks at Waterville, and what the docks at Waterville do is they take all of the barges that bring in logs, and they put them on rail cars, and the rail cars are then run out to Providence and brought down to Troy and converted into wood chips and lumber. Somebody screwed up somewhere in there. I think there was a lumber mill in Worcester, or perhaps it was at another place. But it was abandoned, and it was abandoned when the 2-foot gauge was sort of torn up, because they figured, we can go ahead and build a lumber mill in Troy, but the wood chips mill in Providence didn't shut down, so you have to shuffle wood chips up and down just the same you do logs. This is something I can really illustrate when we get to actually playing the scenarios. Anyways, I'm leveling this out at 300-ish. And the reason I'm doing that is because I don't need there to be any major terrain changes between where Providence is and where we meet the river. The river is going to be sort of creating a canyon, but not quite. It's not very much of a canyon. But we build this more or less straight track through the woods. And, amazingly straight track. We take a curve there, which really isn't explained. But the idea was we're going to be pointing at a mountain here shortly. This road is one of the last interesting things I put in here, and I don't give it a specific ground texture. Not yet. It'll get one when I come back along and do the ground textures for the roads, because I'm pretty sure I have ground textures. If you look at Providence, I set something up already. And this is me figuring out where the traffic should go, and I'm trying to keep traffic that would otherwise cross away, because I don't have crossing gates, and I don't want to have to deal with trains, or cars clipping through my train, or cars magically disappearing the instant before they hit the rabbit crossing, which happens if you delete the road. I decided to use the copy-paste tool for this, because it was, frankly, quicker and easier. So I went ahead and painted this all green. And then, of course, as the episode's name would imply, I gave it some ground cover in the form of maple, beech, and birch. This is me just kind of looking it over. I was figuring out the water level of this stream. Theoretically, that stream originates somewhere off-map. And by off-map, I mean in that empty area between this line and that line. It's probably a lake or something. I didn't bother to include a lake here. Although what could have made for an interesting terrain feature would have been if I had sloped this whole area downward into a sort of bowl pointed at a lake that was at around that elevation, which I think was 269 or thereabouts. I don't recall. Anyways, then I just threw in some trees here to make the area look complete, and sort of looked over it from the air and went, well, it's not beautiful, but this is not going to be the centerpiece of the area. You're going to be meandering through these woods, more or less, and then you're going to come out into the river valley, and it's more like a stream valley at this point, because there isn't much of a river there. But then you're going to follow that stream down, all the way to the point where you branch off and form, or branch off and run into the drumlins towards Waterville, or towards Worcester. Game locked up. Wasn't your video, don't panic. Anyways, yeah, I do want to get at least the track work connected by the time we get around there. And again, the scenery in this area isn't exactly complex. It's fairly simple, and that's a very good thing. And I'm proud of the fact that I could make the area look good. You guys haven't even seen the valley, I don't think. I'm surprised that I could make the area look as good as I did with not very many varied characteristics. Alright, I've put some gravel there, even though that line is abandoned. It doesn't matter, it had ballast. Unknown to most people, it is in fact traversed, but not by any sort of normal service trains. It's, the other side of the map has two ways of getting to it on the standard gauge, and one way of getting to it on the narrow gauge. And this, which is what you might call abandoned trackage. Although it isn't exactly abandoned. It's officially abandoned. Doesn't mean it isn't used. I'm getting really mysterious with this. My point is there are a couple of people who just decide to drive out there, kind of on a whim. They remove the sign and then they put it back so that it doesn't look like they've decided to drive into the abandoned trackage, into the wilderness. There's a lot of, I guess, what were formerly industries and sort of ghost towns out there between here and there. Just like there's an industrial park that was abandoned after the Fontaine Wars on this line here. 53, it's a lull between wars. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you around, and see you next week, and see you tomorrow, and all that jazz.